Shalom, shalom, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so glad you could be here with us. And it's a delight to introduce our speaker, someone I've known for a long time when I worked at UCLA Hillel about almost 15 years ago. And I know many here are deeply concerned with what's happening out in the world right now, what's happening on campus. Today will be a chance, as always, we're a Beit Midrash, to engage in Jewish learning, to engage in analysis, and to engage in machloket l'shem shamayim, disagreement. So as usual, there'll be a chance for presentation, and there'll be a chance, you can type in the chat if you have ideas to share at any point or questions. And then at the end, there'll be a chance to be unmuted to share any questions you have for Rabbi Chaim. And so we hope everyone will come, as always, with an open mind to critically thinking about the pressing issues of our day. Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller is a faculty member at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. He recently celebrated 40 years working with students and faculty as the executive director of the Yitzhak Rabin Hillel Center for Jewish Life, UCLA, where he's now Director Emeritus. Rav Chaim was ordained at Yeshiva University, where he completed a master's in Rabbinic Literature. He's been a lecturer in the departments of Sociology and Near Eastern Languages and Cultures at UCLA, and in the Department of Theological Studies at Loyola Marymount University. He's a faculty member of the Wexner Heritage Foundation. Rav Chaim was the founding director of the Hartman Fellowship for Hillel Professionals and a founding member of Americans for Peace Now. Chaim was a rabbinic consultant to Barbra Streisand during the making of the film Yentl. He and his wife, Dr. Doreen Seidler-Feller, a clinical psychologist, and are the parents of 2 children. So friends, welcome, and we're glad you're here with us to explore the rise of anti-Semitism on campus and some ways we might think about that today from really a master teacher, someone who is immersed in Jewish text and has been involved on campus life for many, many decades. Rav Chaim, welcome, and thanks for being back with us.
Thank you so much, Reb Shmuley. I ought to update my bio a little bit. It's been more, it wasn't so recent that I completed 40 years, I have to say. So I've been on campus for a long time, and that'll be part of my reflections today. I'm also, I have to tell you, very nervous about this presentation. Not because I don't have anything to say. I actually have too much to say, I think. So that's one of the reasons I have to be careful. But also because I tread with trepidation when I enter into this discussion. And I bring with it both what I hope is a sense of reality, although that you'll have to judge that, but also a degree of skepticism that I'm going to share with you that informs my perspective and my attitude, and helps me sort of deal with what's surrounding us. We're going to in a moment, I want to introduce the subject with some text study. I want to engage in some, at least, understanding of the role of self-criticism, and really talk about the absence of any really what I see is a general absence of reflection on the role that we played in this whole issue of the rise of anti-Semitism. So, as I say, I mean, I have found it hard to sleep the last few days, not just because of what is going on, because literally I've been up late at night just watching what's been going on at UCLA, and it's been, a great heartache. I actually, on Tuesday night, I actually texted the chancellor at 11:30 at night, and I said, "Send in the police." And the police didn't come in till 2:00. I mean, didn't send in the police because of me. I can assure you that. But I see what's happening. The anti-Semitism that we've confronted on campus in the last a number of months has been vile, has been base. At times, it's actually emerged in some physical violence, although thank God minimal. But the degree, the base nature of the hostility that has emerged is something that we've not seen before. And I recommend, by the way, just for some sort of sober reflection, to read the article that Erwin Chemerinsky wrote. I think it was back in November or December in the LA Times. He's the dean of the law school at Berkeley, of Bolt, and he was the one whose home was invaded by students who were graduating used the occasion of a graduation dinner to lambaste the dean and his wife for being oppressors and supporting genocide as guests at his dinner. And I mean, I think that's instructive to see how a leading professor reflects on his own experience. But what also makes me nervous, as I said, is my sense of skepticism about overemphasizing the role of anti-Semitism in Jewish life in general, and my abiding sense, contra Franklin 4, that the golden age is not over, that at least we need some degree of consciousness about how good it's been and how good it still is for us. There's a need to maintain that sense of tension. As bad as it seems to be, it's also better than it's ever been. We need to know that we are still sort of living off the residue of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and the emergence of a golden age for Jews in America. It may not be a goal. Well, it's a longer discussion. People can ask me some questions. It seems to me that one of the things that we want to concentrate on today is why this has happened at the university to such an extent, although it's spread into the society as well, and what does it mean? So I do acknowledge the reality. This is a terrible moment. I want to give you one example of anti-Semitism from UCLA that, at least to me, was very poignant. When the students set out tables in the middle of campus, 240 seats, with a picture of the hostages on each seat, a member of the Students for Justice in Palestine tweeted, "Be careful if you want to touch the pictures because there are cameras all around." Meaning, this is a warning. Even though we would like to vandalize the hostage photos, be careful if you do it. Make sure that you're not photographed. But then came the corker, because he continued to say, you should really be careful because we've heard that the pictures have been poisoned and that if you touch it, it's going to damage you. Now, this is a medieval blood libel, right? Poisoning the wells. These are the Jews. And I read this and I said to myself, where do they come to this? How has it happened that students in 2024 are mouthing these outrageous abominations with a degree of, of determination and no shame publicly? So there's something awry that's heretofore we haven't experienced. On the other hand, I do want to offer a corrective. We are these days obsessed with the notion of safety on campus. Now, there are instances where we can point to the fact that there is an environment that's not safe. But in general, I am an opponent of safe spaces as a category that we should at all be involved with. It's ridiculous. Students don't come to the university to be in a safe space. Their mind is to be exposed to unsafe ideas. I'm sorry. And people who are crying for safe space want to close down thinking. Now, that's one of the problems that we're facing. And most Jewish students, when you ask them, will tell you that things, for the most part, unless they get involved in the confrontation, are okay. At Columbia, maybe it's a different story. Columbia's had a hell of a time. I'm sorry. And students have been confronted with, I think maybe it has been over the top. But even there, Jewish life continues, celebrations continue. There's a full array of Jewish opportunities. Jewish studies courses are still available. In fact, the problem with Jewish studies courses is that not enough Jewish students are interested in the Jewish studies courses. And the Jewish studies is in decline. So that's not the issue. Right? I'm gonna come back to this. Right? What I do want to outline my strategy for the day. Right? What I want to do is today is study some text for a few minutes to introduce the subject of self-criticism. Then introduce you to my skepticism, and then talk about why now. Why has this hit the campus now? Then I'm going to talk for a bit about a phenomenon of Israel becoming the substance of Jewish identity. And then I'm going to conclude, if I can, with a historical perspective. I don't know that I don't know that I have a time to do all this. Maybe I'll touch on some of this. But I must conclude, the real conclusion is what can be done. Because I don't think that everything is hopeless or helpless. We shouldn't be helpless, and we should certainly not be hopeless. So first of all, there's a quote from Rabbi Soloveitchik that can be some background for our discussion. It's from a lecture in 1958. I haven't been able to pin it down. My son is working on it, so I hope I'll know by the end of the day, but that'll be too late for you. But Rabbi Soloveitchik said, "The Jew has experienced persecution and brutality. We never had a state. We never had political power. What if we had been a state in the Middle Ages? How would we have acted? Just like the feudal lords? Or would we have acted differently because of Jewish values? Who knows? Now, with the state of Israel, the test has come. We are facing the test. Will we behave like any other state ethically? Will we restrain ourselves from engaging in certain injustices, so to say practices which are in conflict with basic Jewish ethics? Or will we yield to temptation?" Rabbi Soloveitchik continued, "Here we have an opportunity. The Jews are the rulers. They legislate laws. They are, so to say, the masters. Will we act like masters, or will we understand that Judaism doesn't know the concept of master and slave, victor and vanquished, powerful and weak? This is my problem with regards to the state of Israel. The whole of Jewish history will be interpreted in terms of what the state of Israel will do in the next 50 years. If the state of Israel doesn't live up to the Jewish ethics, people will reinterpret Jewish history in a whole different light. The question is not whether Israel will defeat the Arabs on the field of battle, but whether we'll defeat our evil within our own community and be victorious in this field. To me, this is the most important problem." Wow. Okay. I don't know how many people quote Rabbi Soloveitchik or know this quote from Rabbi Soloveitchik's talk that's available. I mean, someone sent it to me in a snippet online. So I don't actually know its source. Now, the Torah that I wanted to share with you were actually two pieces. And I'll read this one. I can't read it all. This one I can do Baal Peh. All right. The son of Esav married a woman named Timnah. Now, the Midrash says that this Timnah was a daughter of royalty. And she wanted to marry into Abraham's family because she understood Abraham's family to be a family of note, right? And she had this aspiration, the aspiration for some degree of transcendence, right? The family of Abraham rejected her. So she argued, she said, well, if I can't get directly into the family of Abraham, I'll get into one of Abraham's descendants from the other side, and I'll marry Esav's son. And who was the descendant of Esav's son? Who was the descendant? Amalek. So the Midrash, this is an amazing Midrash. The Midrash says, Amalek was our fault. You have it also, by the way, in the Midrashim on the Parshat Amalek. It depends on to whom that refers. But the sense of self-reflection and the capacity that we have, even though we understand that our oppressors are guilty, no one wants to remove the guilt of the oppressors. And that's a false accusation. All we're asking for is some consciousness that we play a role. And that's a question that we have to ask ourselves, especially today. How can it be that the Jews who were riding high, the Jews who in many ways have shaped the nature of the modern university, are now the main villains at the university? How can it happen? By the way, not only by students, by faculty. They're not all crazy. That's the point. In other words, the Jewish response is, the world hates us. They're not all crazy. Right? And as an example of how not crazy they all are is, I came upon this text actually by accident. It's a translation from Solomon ibn Verger's Shevet Yehuda. He was a historian in the 16th century who lived through the expulsion, the Spanish expulsion at the end of the 15th century, and he wrote this in Italy. And he reflected on the Jewish situation. He understood that hatred of the Jews was built into the Christian surroundings. He did not deny it. He understood that as the cause of the expulsion, but he also put a conversation in the mouth of the king, and this is a fictitious conversation, trying to explain the nature of why the Jews are hated. Why are the Jews hated? The answer of Thomas, who is this fictitious character who's speaking to Alfonso, I have never seen an intelligent person who hates the Jews. They are hated only by the masses, and for good reason. First, the Jews are proud and are always seeking to domineer. They do not consider that they are exiles and serfs driven from land to land. On the contrary, they try to present themselves as lords and nobles, and therefore the people envy them. The sage has said that the hatred which is caused by envy can never be overcome. My Lord will find empirical confirmation in the fact that when the Jews came to his kingdom, they came as serfs and exiles wearing tattered clothes. For many years, they neither put on an expensive garment nor evinced any haughtiness. In those days, did my Lord fear that any blood accusations were made against them? If such had been made, they would have been recorded in the chronicles of the kings of Spain, as is the good and proper custom, in order to learn from them for the future. There can thus be no question that as long as they gave no cause for envy, they were beloved. But now the Jew is ostentatious. If he has 200 pieces of gold, he immediately dresses himself in silk and his children in embroidered clothing. This is something that not even nobles who possess an annual income of 1,000 doubloons would do. Therefore, accusations are leveled against them, which may perhaps lead to their expulsion from the kingdom, etc. A second reason, look down here, a second reason for the hatred is that when the Jews came to my Lord's kingdom, they were poor, and the Christians were rich. Now it is the opposite, since the Jews are clever and achieve their purposes with cunning. Moreover, they became very rich by lending on interest. My Lord will note that 3/4 of all the lands and estates of Spain are all in the hands of the Jews, and this on account of the heavy interest. Okay. So, I mean, this is striking. A man who's gone through the expulsion, who understands the evil that has been built into the rejection of the Jews, nevertheless understands that there's some degree of a role played by Jews in inciting this type of hatred, that is, in bringing about an envy of the Jewish position. Now, throughout the Middle Ages, I have myself owned a document from the 17th century from Italy, I'm forgetting from which city in Italy, but nevertheless, it's a document issued by the community of sumptuary laws, limitations on how much can be spent on weddings, what type of clothing can be worn, jewelry, etc. Things that are, as we see in Ibn Verga's comments here, ostentation, and not a willingness to restrain oneself and to live with a sense of enough and sufficiency, rather than with sort of an overwhelming need to show that we have arrived. So this is the fate of a people that lived without, and that all of a sudden gained a position in society, and used that position in such a way that it aroused envy in others. To me, this rings quite true to some aspects of our contemporary experience and of our experience at the university, and I will explain. Okay, now first, a few comments. I said I wanted to introduce you to a little bit of my skepticism. So I'm going to tell you what my anti-Semitism skepticism is all about. My concern, my great concern here. Let me stop the share and open up the screen again. Okay. My great concern is that we have fallen into what I call the victimhood trap. The first phase of our American historical experience was to establish our security and defeat anti-Semitism. We felt until, I can tell you this, at the end of the 80s, it was clear to us that we've accomplished that goal, and that we ended anti-Semitism as a significant factor. And we determined, Charles Silberman, who wrote a book, A Certain People, he noted in the book two things that always remained with me. Number one, when the new Harvard Hillel House was dedicated at the end of, or in the 80s, I think, then they danced with the Torah past the statue of John Harvard. Number one. Number two, the president of the Ford Foundation was the president of a synagogue, a Ford Motor Company was at that time the president of a synagogue in Detroit. So Silberman offered this up as evidence that anti-Semitism was no longer a factor in Jewish life and that we should get over it. Meaning, the ADL should continue to function, it should be vigilant, but that can't be the operative focus of Jewish life, and we have to move on because there's something more at stake that we will lose if we focus obsessively about anti-Semitism. And that gave rise to what Edgar Brockman, of all people, raised as an issue of the second phase of Jewish life in America, and that is the focus on Renaissance, emphasizing Jewish education. What was the problem? Renewal. Brockman, and that's why Brockman became the president of Hillel, because he saw Jewish American youth as the vehicle for this revolution in Jewish life that would be rededicate itself to Jewish sources and to the meaning in Jewish life. What was the problem that Brockman was trying to address? And that he was trying to address the downside of organizing our identity and focus around Jewish suffering. This is what Seidler Baron famously called the lachrymose theory of Jewish history, that as if Jewish history was driven by tears. You know, I always say to my students, if Jewish history were a history of tears and suffering and persecution all the time, how do we write all these books, right? If Shmuley was spending his time just focusing on fighting anti-Semitism, how could he be so creative? Right? That's the point. We are creative people. Anti-Semitism is not a drive to creativity. In fact, in many ways, it closes it down. So Baron was upset with the idea that we were trying to construct Jewish history as a history of oppression. Now, the general problem is the problem of victimhood. Why? What's the problem? Victims have no agency. In victimhood, it's always them. One of the things that I have to say about this recent period is it's hard for me to recognize this as a Jewish period because I don't hear any self-criticism. It's always them. It's what they're doing to us. I have to tell you something. That's the fate, or that's the excuse, that's the language that's used by our opponents. They only see the other as the enemy, and they don't look inside, and they're not self-reflective. We can't afford to do this to ourselves. So number two, it's always them. To be a victim means that we're defined by the other. That is, as Sartre wrote, it's the anti-Semite who defines the Jew, and not the Jew. There was a few years ago, one of our student leaders went to Israel, came back, and said she went to two museums. One was a museum about what they did to us. The other was a museum about what we did for ourselves. And it was the second museum that she valued more than the first museum. And that was the difference between Yad Vashem and at that time Beit HaTfutzot, or the museum, or Anu. Right? Victimhood leads to a certain type of fatalism. Halacha l'Moshe miSinai she'esav sonei leYaakov. You ask anyone, we're fated. We've been hated. We will be. We are hated, and we will be hated. It's sort of a litany, a religious litany. Hatred of the Jew is inevitable. There's no way out of it. It's built into the DNA of history that it must be. That's a very sick outlook. Because who wants to be a Jew if you can't escape the fate of being hated by the world? Why would I want to be Jewish if that's what it means? And can I understand that there can be change? Finally, in terms of what we see on campus, is that it generates a competition in what we call the victimhood Olympics. Who suffered more? And in terms of the Middle East, victims can't make peace. Right? It's impossible unless you're able to overcome. That goes for both sides, by the way. Whether you're a Palestinian or whether you're Jewish. You can't make peace if you see yourself as a victim because you have no trust. You have no ability to consider the possibility that there's another reality other than the one that you know, another one that you are mired in. You need a sense of confidence. There's an absence of confidence in this total focus on being a victim. So I'm constitutionally unable to allow myself to let anti-Semitism control my life. I'm a proud and I'm a confident Jew. I don't need anti-Semitism to be Jewish. And by the way, that's the role. I mean, what is Israel and Zionism all about? How can we claim to be victims if we're truly Zionists. I consider the idea of Jews who see themselves as victims. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I say it this way; it's a little exaggerated, but I see them as I see it as anti-Zionist. That's real anti-Zionism because you don't understand how Zionism has changed the nature of what it means to be a Jew in the world. It's also introduced some dangers. Okay, I mean that's part of the equation. But we are people with power and influence, no matter what the situation, and no matter what the situation on campus with the hatred that's been sort of raining down upon us, we still have influence on campus. Just look at what's going on. Look at how the university presidents are reacting. I mean, look at it from that perspective. This never happened in this fashion. Now, of course, Congress played a role in this. I understand. There are political dimensions to this. Yeah, all right. I have to stop myself from going too far on this. Okay, so that's my issue with this anti-Semitic moment. We must, of course, be vigilant, very vigilant, and we have to protect the students from the attacks on the students. But we must not let anti-Semitism be the motivating factor in our Yiddishkeit. Let's look at the proliferation of anti-Semitic organizations fighting anti-Semitism. There's a whole business of fighting anti-Semitism, and the business, by the way, is if anything, they're preying on all of you because each one of them wants to raise more money. So anti-Semitism serves as a focal point for their fundraising, and they have to get into it. Everyone has to get into it. And rabbis, it's a substance of rabbinic sermons. What that means is that Jews today, excuse me for saying it this way, all right, who are obsessed with anti-Semitism, I think, are running on empty. They have no Jewish fuel. And instead, they rely on the religion of anti-Semitism to fill them up. Sorry, anti-Semitism is a Judaism of know-nothingism. That's not the great peril that we face on campus. Okay, the great peril that we face on campus today is Jewish ignorance, and that needs to be the focus. That at the same time that we fight against anti-Semitism, we have to make sure that we know what our priority is. We no longer know what our priority is. I can tell you that much from what I see and how I see what's going on in the Hillel world as a focus of activity and in terms in general in the Jewish community. Now, Baron had one of his famous students. Arthur Hertzberg was also a rather well-known rabbi. So Hertzberg had a line, and his line was as follows: "Why are American Jews so obsessed with anti-Semitism? Because they have a fantasy. Once they defeat the anti-Semites, they won't have to be Jewish any longer." So that's what I'm telling you. Anti-Semitism is about, I mean, in other words, this total being consumed by anti-Semitism is one type of replacement for Judaism as the focus. And it's thin. It's not sufficient. It's only about them. It's not about you. And it doesn't motivate you to want to live for something. On the contrary, you want to live because there are anti-Semites around. You want to live because Judaism, right? Judaism is enriching. So I think we need to know that. We need to shift the focus, and I don't know who's going to lead the charge. Moreover, there's a psychological dimension with obsession with anti-Semitism that it's really harmful and dangerous. And the example of that is a student of ours who was on campus on Sunday when the Jewish community had a rally to support the Jewish students against the encampment at UCLA, and a group of Jewish thugs came to disrupt and to fight against the other side. And she was standing with a group of Israelis and Americans that were part of Omdim B'Yachad. We stand together, Palestinians and Jews. So the thugs who came were calling her a capo, were telling her she wasn't really Jewish. And one actually said to her, this is a Jewish person, I think an Israeli, who said to her, "You should have died in the kibbutz." So the phenomenon, the psychological phenomenon is extreme obsession with anti-Semitism produces a Jewish anti-Semite. Very, very careful. We all know one such person. His name was Meir Kahana. He loved Jews to death. Right? And he actually targeted Jews. He was able to target who was a real Jew and who was not a real Jew. Right? That's the stuff that we want to avoid. And we have too many people like that who have more influence, these days. Now, the other thing I'm only saying one line, and we can talk about it later, and that is the state of Israel has also been very interested in promoting the anti-Semitism narrative because it actually is something that's beneficial to Zionism from a certain perspective, from a perverse perspective, unfortunately. And the state of Israel has also exploited the anti-Semitism as a shield. It's not an accident, that Netanyahu's involved in this. Okay. The conclusion of my skepticism. My fear is that we have regressed to our familiar position of being victims because it's the most comfortable form of being Jewish. The question is, will there be a future for that form of Judaism? However, if you're a student on campus, I want to repeat what I said. There are strong opportunities, and many opportunities for you. The Hillels, I think, for the most part, are better than ever. Chabad has risen in the last 10 years or so to become a real source and a real factor on campus. The universities are still, we're at the tail end of this period, but it's still the period where the universities are led by Jews who care. I can tell you this much, that the chancellor at UCLA really cares. I mean, he's retiring, so I don't know who's going to replace him. And UCLA and alumni are very active. It turns out that the chair of the Board of Regents of the University of California, it's not just UCLA, of all 10 universities, is a former Hillelnik from UCLA with whom I still have an ongoing relationship. So it's not without influence and not without concern and not without protection. We are there, we're in the right places. And things, that doesn't mean that things can't at times get out of hand. And this is what I want to talk about. Why now? And maybe this will be sort of, I won't be able to, I'll give you a little bit of history towards the end. Why now? And here I want to warn you, I'm going to say some things that may not be agreeable to some of you. The current situation, in some ways, is a fulfillment of Netanyahu's lifelong dream. He's been able to establish with certainty that we are a people who dwells alone. He believed this. He wrote a book about this. It's internalized in such a way that it is his person. And in doing so, he succeeded in doing something, he succeeded in uniting the whole world against the Jews. That's a type of perversion. But look around, and you look around and you have to know that there are possibilities of change. Who imagined in your lifetime that you would see the Catholic Church turn around on its doctrines regarding the Jews? This is very far away from anything we imagined. Who would imagine that Anwar Sadat would fly to Jerusalem? Now, Anwar Sadat didn't love Jews. Should never be the criteria for the end of anti-Semitism or for how we deal with anti-Semitism. In fact, it was a pragmatic decision. But when you make such a pragmatic decision and you live in that way for years, it becomes ingrained as a matter of expectation. Just look at the last 30. How many years is it? 79. So what is it? Is it 40 years already since in the 35, whatever, since the Egyptian peace treaty, and Egypt, with all the troubles, hasn't lifted a finger against Israel? In fact, has cooperated with Israel? That's the greatest achievement, it seems to me, one of the great achievements of the state of Israel, to make peace with Israel from a political perspective. Look at the positive side of things. Does the world hate the Jews? Do all the Arabs hate the Jews? Is that the reality? I doubt it. I mean, I just don't see it. And there's someone who keeps on pushing this point of view against us. Now, let me get to the campus. What's going on the campus? So there's a convergence. Some of it is a consequence of the fact that we're caught in the campus culture war between progressives and American liberalism. The progressives on campus are in a battle against what they consider to be regressive liberalism. Now, there's an article by, I think it's George Packer, that was in the Atlantic, who really outlines, I think in excellent manner, the changes in the campus since the 60s. Now, I just want to give you a demographic dimension of the change. The university in the 60s was largely a reflection of white America, and it was very waspy still. It was controlled by a certain elite. The Jews were the upstarts. I still know the first Jewish English professor at UCLA, because English was a discipline where Jews were thought to be unfit, because how can Jews transmit the holy literature of America? Right? Only an ethnic American, a real American. So I know the professor who was the first Jew to be given tenure in the English department to teach American literature. So we went through a transformation. The university changed. We broke through, and following our breakthrough, the ethnics broke through. The neighborhood changed tremendously since the 60s. It is a very different university from the university that all the alumni are complaining about. Of course they're complaining about it. They don't recognize their own university. They don't really understand the nature of the change in the culture and the society. Now, and there are things to criticize, but you need to know the reality. You can't expect it to continue the way it was when the surroundings have changed radically. And they are radically changed, and there are different values that have been introduced. Now, in this war, Jews in general are old-style liberals, right? And liberalism has been our guarantor in American society. I don't think we should forget that. Okay, so we are on the other side of progressive politics, which is one direction that's been introduced into the university. And I think I can say this to a degree to the detriment of the university, because it's been over politicized, and the progressivism there's something I can't get into it now, but there's something that's undermining about of the structure itself, destructive of the culture itself. That's part of this progressivism, because it borders on revolutionary ideology, which it seems to me, is never healthy. Now, add to that the prominence of some Jewish leaders in supporting Trump. And as a result, what you have in the minds of the progressives is that Israel is identified with Trump, right? Public enemy number one. So Israel becomes public enemy number one, supported by Jewish Trumpists, even though that's a gross generalization, and you'd say that it's a type of stereotyping of Jews. But it has to do with prominence and what appears to be rather than what is. All right, so that's one factor. Another factor, and then I'm going to get to the main issue: the internet. Right, the internet spreads rumors. It's very powerful in terms of how the word spreads and infects people. And the other thing that the internet has done, and there's some research now, Jonathan Haidt has done this with what's her name, Twenge at San Diego, is that it has undermined our traditional notions of community. It was interesting to me. I called a student, I had met him just a few weeks ago, who studies at Yale, and I said, tell me something. How do you understand the fact that because he mentioned to me that his friends are out there protesting, and they were people and he still has a relationship with them. What's going on? So one of the things that he said was they're looking for community. In the absence of the normal community structures that have existed for years, clubs. Young people aren't members of clubs any longer. They don't want to be members of clubs. A religious affiliation in a church or in some institution, they're anti-institutional. So many things have changed in terms of where people locate themselves. So in the absence of those and in being alone all the time, just facing one's computer and one's phone, here was an opportunity to regain community in protest and be part of something and find some meaning. Even though it means being against, it's not so simple that people were willing to do this. All right. Okay, so those are some factors, but I want to get to the tough stuff. What's happened on campus, and this is where I admit this is my own, political perspective, and it's why I introduced this with the study of text on self-criticism. This was an explosion waiting to happen. For all these years on campus that I can remember, and I've been on campus since 1973, we've been managing the conflict. And managing the conflict doesn't work. That's one of the lessons of October the 7th. In other words, with all due respect to Micha Goodman, that's not going to build us a future, right? It'll get us a few days. It'll get us, it'll buy time until it's no longer satisfactory, right? And we were using up our currency as victims and as a lauded democracy in Israel. And finally, the gas ran out in Gaza and in the anti-democratic putsch of Netanyahu and his cronies that preceded it. In other words, we demonstrated to the world that Israel is not a democratic country. We demonstrated it in 57 years of an occupation, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, right? And in the fact that there was recognizable to everyone who has a democratic impulse, the attempt to undermine democracy but on the part of the Netanyahu government, that our claim to be the only democracy in the Middle East was a false claim. What I'm saying is that it's not that they delegitimize Israel and that's anti-Semitism. That's one of the categories of anti-Semitism. But we've delegitimized Israel and set the stage for this uprising. As per the students at Columbia, I agree with them, with what they claim. They hung the flag. What did it say on the flag? Intifada. What you're seeing today on the campuses is a campus-wide national intifada against the Jews, against Israel. Remember, it's the first intifada. Thank God, not the second intifada. The first intifada wasn't murderous. They were throwing stones. Not good. So they're throwing stones at us now. And the reason I put it this way is, remember David Grossman's book, A Yellow Wind? The Yellow Wind was written and published a year before the first intifada. If you read Yellow Wind, you knew there would be an intifada. You wouldn't be surprised. If you watched what was going on campus, you knew it couldn't last because we were denying, we were covering up, we were in many ways using language of deception and not addressing the issue. Our students and the community, the Jewish community, have been sitting on their hands for 57 years. I mean, I wrote an article about the 40th anniversary of the occupation, and this is what I wrote. I'm going to read you just a few lines from that article. We, the people who enshrined human rights in our classic teachings, have, as a result of the occupation and its ensuing policies, become a universal human rights offender, castigated again and again by respectable organizations, including our own. All right? Right? B'Tselem. We always remember Netanyahu, how proud he was of B'Tselem, because B'Tselem was willing to report on violations, and he used that as an example of the democratic impulse of Israel. Well, they want to close down B'Tselem now, of course, because that's what institutions do when they get sort of, when they become insular and sort of self-generating in that way. Number two, the occupation has made us a more parochial people, introducing a fearful sense of isolation and abandonment. All right, I'm going to skip here. The occupation, I wrote, and this is a bit exaggeration. The occupation, maybe not, is the greatest catastrophe to befall the Jewish people in the aftermath of the Holocaust. All right, it involves the dehumanization of another people as our subjects. How could we do that as Jews? The settlers and the compliant Israeli governments that have supported them have succeeded in overturning 2,000 years of a tradition of justice for the other and in transforming the Jewish people into an oppressive occupier. The settlement movement has corrupted the people of Israel to the point that the ideals that inspired the creation of Israel have withered and the moral voice of the Jewish tradition has been compromised. The occupation is the most un-Jewish of projects, and from a religious perspective, I think, is a Chilul Hashem, the desecration of the name. We all bear the burden of guilt, and that's my claim here, and can gain the right. Otherwise, in other words, why do we bear the burden of guilt? Because we didn't protest. We sat on our hands. We didn't get involved. We didn't make demands on the Jewish community. We let it continue. Not only that, we asked our students to defend the indefensible. In other words, we put our students in harm's way because we set them up with advocacy speakers who taught them how to defend and apologize and avoid taking responsibility and make it the other side that is guilty rather than ourselves. We never denounced or condemned the occupation, even when we embraced two states. I had this conversation with the students at Hillel once. I said, you support two states? Oh yes, that's our policy. I said, so how come you can't criticize the occupation? If you're in favor of two states, doesn't mean that you're against the occupation. We can't say that. How can you say that? They said to me. You're weakening our position when you say that. But that's exactly what had to be said, and we never said it. In other words, we weren't given permission to say it. That doesn't mean there weren't people who weren't saying it, but no, with this, the general thrust. Right? When Yossi Klein Halevi came to UCLA some years ago, so we gave a talk, and there were some community members there, and Yossi talked about the occupation. So one of the community members said, "How can you say that word? That's the word of the enemy." So Yossi said, "What are you talking about? We use that word all the time in Israel." So think about this. What a standard we've set up, a standard of defense that we've set up for ourselves here in the United States that violated the norms of our discourse because we couldn't admit the sense that there was maybe a weakness in the wall itself. And we didn't have a sense of the reality of what Israel is. Israel's a normal state. We tried to hold on to a sort of fictional notion, a mythic notion of what Israel is. It's a state. It operates like states in self-interest. That's why it needs a conscious community of concerned Jews who can be committed to Israel and at the same time demand of Israel to adhere to its values and its standards. That's what a good citizen is. Not someone who concedes and just throws lies back and says, Netanyahu, whatever you do, we're going to support you. And that's basically, unfortunately, been our position. I want to end this aspect, and then I know I have to conclude in a moment, with a conversation that I had with David Hartman in 1979. My first conversation with Hartman, and this is how it ended. He told me the following. He said, the most important religious question that the Jews have to face today is, in those days he used this word, how to rule over a minority. And I have to say, whether we use the word rule or any other word, that's still the most important religious question that we face today. We haven't figured out how to do that. We're doing well, by the way, with Arab citizens of Israel. And we should note that and talk about that and use that, and by the way, and use that as an argument against those who say it's impossible to deal with the Arabs. What do you mean it's impossible to deal with the Arabs? Look at the integration of Arabs into Israeli society, the number of doctors. So of course you can deal with Arabs if you deal with them as equals, if you deal with them with respect, if we deal with them with dignity. Now, the other thing that in terms of delegitimization that the occupation has generated is this type of language. And I remember the language and I remember our reaction. We were told that Ofra and Shiloh, two settlements, right, old settlements, were equivalent to Haifa and Tel Aviv. So the world has said, okay, we're going to play your game. Indeed, because Ofra and Shiloh are illegitimate settlements, and against international law, you yourselves have declared that the state of Israel is illegitimate and against international law, because Ofra and Shiloh are equivalent to Haifa. And we were, I'm telling you that this I can say, I was involved with a group, we warned the Jewish community. This is going to come home to bedevil us. Because we were the ones who articulated the doctrine that's leading to the undermine of our legitimacy. And we don't know any longer, certainly young people don't know any longer how to make the argument to support on behalf of Israel. Now, I have a lot to say. I haven't said it all, so I'm going to end with just a few sentences. There's a history here. There's a history where when I came to campus, Jews had alliances with the ethnic groups, and that alliance fell apart, and Jews were forced to make new alliances with the fraternities. I mean, this has to do with class and the change in our own sense of having arrived in America. I mean, basically, we made it in America, and we who were once part of the oppressed, once united with the minorities, we moved up to a place of acceptance. There's no problem with that. There's no problem with that, and I'm not ashamed of that. The fact is that most of us didn't look back, and we forgot who we really were, right? And no matter with all the claims that we marched with Martin Luther King, we lost a sense of our identification with the people who are still the oppressed class in America, and maybe this audience is distinctive and different, but for the most part, we didn't mind our classification of whites as whites. I mind it. I'm not white. I'm a Jew, and not only is my life full of color in a figurative way, but there's something distinctive about my life that I'm not ready to give up. And if you have something distinctive, you'll never settle for being mixed in with the grand majority and singing the song of the majority. You know that. That's not who you are. And when you do that, you violate your own sense of your own identity. So the university, in some ways, is complicit in redefining the nature of who Jews are. It complicated things, and most Jews like that, but they're trying to have it both ways. That don't forget, we're victims. Well, but what do you mean the victims? You're now on top of the world. All right, now. Another point in this, and again, that's what I'm telling you, many things to discuss. We didn't succeed, and the university here failed in transmitting the notions that people who are victims can also be victimizers, and that people who are victimizers or people who have power can also still be victims. That's maybe a difficult tension to hold on to, but it's a significant and necessary tension, and we've lost that. What can be done? Maybe I'll say at the end. Let's take a few questions, and I'll say a few things at the end about what can be done. I'll tell a story to conclude. All right. Some years ago, I was sitting in my office, and one of my colleagues on campus called me and said, "Fine, what are you doing about what's going on campus?" So I said to him, "What's going on campus?" I didn't know. So he said, "Well, the Arab students have created checkpoints, right, on campus to block people's access. And the Jewish students were standing beside the checkpoints with little pieces of paper and handing out the little pieces of paper, which was sort of supposed to be a bomb. And as they hand it out to people, they say, 'You're dead. We're suicide bombers.' So you had this sort of carnival of checkpoints and suicide bombers as both sides are attacking each other. So this, my friend who's on the faculty said, 'So Chaim, what are you doing?' So I went to the back of Hillel and I shouted out, 'Do we have any oak tag?' So people looked at me and said, 'What's oak tag?' So, it's a big cardboard white piece of paper, and I wrote on it, no to occupation, no to, I forget something else I said, no to separation or whatever, yes to peace, yes to peace. And I went out on campus in the midst of this confrontation, and I held the oak tag up in front of the crowd. People were looking at me and saying, I mean, it was in the teens, and I was already, an older person. Who's this guy with white hair, this crazy guy with white hair? And I kept on holding up the poster. A few minutes, or well, more than a few minutes, like 5 or 10 minutes into holding up the poster, a young man walks up to me and says, "Can I help you?" I said, "You sure can," because my hand, listen, I'm not Moshe Rabbeinu, but my hands were getting heavy from holding the poster up. So he said, "Can I help you and hold up the poster?" I said, "Fine." I said, "Who are you?" He said, "George." I said, "George, what do you study?" He says, "Electrical engineering." "Oh, I'm a graduate student." "All right, but where are you from?" "I'm from Gaza, and I can't stand the crazies on my side. And we need to form some coalition between those of us who are sober and have a perspective, who can talk honestly and form a coalition, and who can penetrate the falsehoods that are dominating the discourse." Questions, please. Sorry that I've gone on and on.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, we would love to take a couple of questions. If anyone would like to ask a question, please raise your hands and then I will call on people. I saw Stan's hand up first.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the Jewish students who are participating with the demonstrators. I think their argument is, look, you educated us to learn Torah, and Israel's killing children. You educated us to learn Torah and to be careful of the other, and it seems that starving a population has become a war tactic. Now, for those of us who are our age, no matter how much we might disagree with Israel's policy, we're loyal to Israel because this is how we were brought up.
Right.
These deal differently. So I don't know if you had an opportunity to talk to some of the students who feel that way. I'd like to know how you would respond to those kids.
Right. So I had a dialogue years ago at the beginning of If Not Now with one of its founders. I had a conversation, right? 3 hours. And at the end of the 3 hours, I said, can you tell the members of If Not Now that the reason that you want to oppose the occupation, I'm sorry, can you tell If Not Now wanted the Jewish community to oppose the occupation. Can you tell the Jewish community that the reason you want to oppose the occupation is because you want, you care about the survival of the state of Israel? That would make a big difference. And the person told me no. They couldn't say that because there are members of the group who don't care about the survival of the state of Israel. So this is something I haven't talked about. But there is a phenomenon, and there are young Jews who decided they want to be Jewish without Israel. They want to. I remember years ago, I turned to my daughter. We were walking together in Manhattan on a Friday night, and I said, "Shuli, do you know some young Jews?" Because she had associations with people because of her work who want a divorce from Israel. They want a divorce from Israel. Too many lies. You've told us stories again and again, and you've forced us to betray who we really are. And we're not going to do it anymore because we care and we value our tradition. Now, do I have a solution? I'm sorry, I don't, except for the following. We really need to keep on talking to them. I don't think that I don't know how, again, I haven't mastered this, and I'm not sure that, I have advice to give you. But I know that, if we can hold the Russia at our table on Pesach night, we can still hold members, if they're willing, if they're interested, members of Jewish Voice for Peace at our table. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm very concerned. And I'm concerned that the Jewish people are going to split. And it's not just with young people. I have to tell you that. You think it's just these young, revolutionaries. Plenty of faculty, plenty of older Jews feel the same way. In fact, I think that they're the majority of Jewish Voice of Peace is not driven by young people. Those are older people. And they've also turned their backs. And so for me, the issue is not, I do think we have to be able to continue to communicate with them, but I don't know what to hope for in terms of I think that we have to try to understand what are they reacting to? Why have they had this extreme reaction? Now, Stan, part of it is what you said. They didn't have the lived experience of the state of Israel. I've been a critic of Israel all my life. You can't get Israel out of me from morning till night. I speak Hebrew at home with my, in other words, it's my life. I love Israel, right? So the criticism comes out of that love and out of a desire and a vision that Israel can be better. I don't want to give up on that vision, right? That young people don't have that commitment. And we failed. We failed to transmit that commitment because we only translated Israel as a refuge. They don't need Israel as a refuge. In fact, maybe it's more threatening in Israel than it is here. So that didn't work. We never transmitted the substance of what Zionism was really all about, a rebirth of, in other words, there are two phases to Zionism. You depend on who you're turning to, whether it's Ahad Ha'am or Jonathan Sachs. So Ahad Ha'am would say that the phase that he thought was ignored by Herzl was rebuilding Judaism and the Jewish people. That was a dimension of Zionism that I think we rarely ever talk about. And Sachs said there was two stages to Zionism. The first stage was building the state, and the second stage was creating a moral society. That's a project that young people could get excited about if that's what the centerpiece of Zionism. How can we do something that's not the norm? That's interesting, right? A contradiction, a state that cares about the moral aspects of its governance. Okay, that we could get into. So there are people. And maybe we have to remove. Maybe the answer is a renewal of Zionism. But this is who's going? How many people are involved in this? Are going to be involved in this? 10, 20, 30. I'm being serious. Who cares? For the most part, the Hartman Institute, little corners are concerned. So maybe we have to start that conversation. Really, and get it to bubble up. the Jewish community leaders are completely deaf to this issue.
Thank you. Warren, I know your hand is up. We can take one more brief question, and then I apologize that we're going to be out of time. So one more question.
Thank you very much for your talk today. I think it was very, very informative. Let me ask you a quick question. So since anti-Semitism and concern over the Israel and Gaza war appears to rank 15th out of 16th of the, I guess, the polled concerns of young people under 35.
Say that again. Say that again.
Well, I have seen polls of what the main concerns are of young people under 35, and these people at the university, if we agree, most of them are not activists or terrorists. So their concern about Israel and the Gaza war and anti-Semitism ranks 15th out of the 16 broader concerns they have about the world. If given if this is true, and given that there is a broader global agenda of both China in constructing and completing their Silk Road initiative, and of the global South, which includes the GCC in terms of creating some forms of world order, which would actually encompass about 40% of the world's population. To what extent can we really believe, as is often the case historically, that anti-Semitism is sort of a trope or a device rather than the main issue?
All right. So, a number of things that you've compressed here. Israel is a nation state operating in a global world politically, and I'm certainly not qualified to comment on that, except to say the following: that from that perspective, I can understand the variety of arguments. And you didn't talk about Iran, the threat from Iran.
Well, Iran's part of the global South, is
right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. And the realistic threat that Israel is facing. So, what I would say here is as follows. It's similar. It's akin to what I talked about in terms of. I'm forgetting. All right. But in other words, we can't afford to mess up our commitment to basic moral responsibilities, and at the same time imagine that we're going to have the global support that we need in order to function as a state in this international array. And it seems to me that that's where what I'm saying has something to contribute, meaning we need alliances. And we have potential alliances that can help us work in and push back on the pressure from all these other forces. But we're going to lose those alliances. We had an example just now about this, or maybe not. For 20 years, there's a Saudi peace plan on the table. Did Israel ever respond to the Saudi peace plan? What do you know about the Saudi peace plan? You think it's new that the Saudis are coming up now and they want to normalize relations with Israel? For 20 years, and we didn't even read. We never published it. We never read it. We never discussed it. We said it's a non-starter instead of it being the beginning of a conversation, of a negotiation. So there are opportunities that we have to maintain alliances that will help us in those areas that you're worried about, right? And more than that, it seems to me that if we actually had embraced, let's say, the Saudi peace plan, which would have opened us up to actually some resolution with the Palestinians, then there would be less alienation from Israel, from our left, the Jewish left, and from leftists in general. That's part of the experience that I had. When you extend your hand and when you show that you offer dignity and equality to the other, people notice. And what I'm talking about is not the extremists on the other side. I'm talking about the middle ground. Most of the students who stand in the middle and don't want to be affected by this polar war, they're impressed by any effort to promote coexistence. Where has been our education to coexistence? What we've educated students to do is to defend and to advocate. Advocate means we're right, they're wrong, and we can't trust the other side. It's the wrong form of education. Are we willing to change that? Is it too late to change that? I think that, in other words, internationally, that's where we have to go. We have to build up that credit and build up those relationships. I'll tell you one final thing. All right, I was going to tell you, in terms of what to do. I'm involved with an organization involving Jews and Palestinians. And this is what I heard one of the Israeli Jews, who's a settler, say the following. She said the following. She was stabbed by Palestinian terrorists while she was carrying a child. Both she and the child survived, thank God. She said the following. When she meets a Palestinian and she tells the Palestinian, I realize, or I know that you love this land as much as I love this land, and that you have rights here, like I have rights here, all the hostility melts away. Can we articulate that position? Can we face the other and see the humanity? That, I think, is one road to diminishing the vile hatred and also to achieving the alliances that are necessary for the future. I hope. So thank you. And Warren, we can continue to talk. I think, I don't know whether you're satisfied with my answer, but I appreciate the fact that we've had an opportunity for this conversation. Thank you.
I would enjoy that.
Thank you. And you should all be well, and we should hope, we should hope for Besorot Tovot, the Chatufim and Nedarim, the hostages, we hope they should be returned as soon as possible. You should be asking questions. Why aren't they here? What's the government done? We're not asking questions. That's what I'm begging you to do. Ask questions. We're a people that we were raised on the importance of asking questions and challenge your community and your rabbis to talk about the issues. And have a robust conversation about these questions, and try to invite and involve the younger generation as well, so that they see that we're considering these questions and we're not hiding from them. All right. Thank you. We'll hit the road.
Thank you so much, Rav Chaim. Thank you all for joining us. I know it's a difficult topic and there are a lot of diverse opinions in the room, so we appreciate you joining and engaging with us. Our next class will be on May 9th at 1 p.m., Compassion, Kindness, and Dignity, with Rabbi Dr. Gil Gershon Tivon and Dr. Shirley Regev, so we hope you can all join us for that as well. Thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of your day.